ça je l'ai déjà dit. Je rêve aussi du milli, mais plus que tout je rêve du paradis. Plus que vainqueur en Jésus-Christ qui me donne la force. Rester fidèle jusqu'à ce que sombra le camp. C'est pour son nom que moi je veux porter les gants.
Alright, so we are here with another episode of the MIIOGS Podcast. I'm Micah.
I'm Emmanuel.
And yeah, we're going to dive right into it. This is getting really exciting. We're just basically in these I would call them pre-episodes. We're going over the entire story of the Bible very quickly, because afterwards we're going to really spend our time in the podcast just looking at culture and seeing how we're having dialogue and engaging culture, but seeing how it all relates to the story of the Bible. We're just getting that foundation done in these pre-episodes. But in our last episode, we talked a little bit about really like the fear of the Lord, you know, and how that keeps us from sin.
Yeah.
In the first episode, we talked about how we trying to ascend to the place of God, us seizing our own autonomy, causes us to fall into sin. And in this last one, how not having the fear of God causes us to fall into sin. And yeah, that was a big episode. It went a little long, but we had, we were talking about Moses, so we had just there's a lot to say on Moses.
A lot to pull out.
Yeah. But in this next episode, it gets really exciting. This is going to be our last episode on the Old Testament, so we have a whole lot to wrap up. If you look at your Bibles, if you look at where we're at, there's a lot. So we're going to be a lot quicker. We're going to be kind of going over things a lot more quickly in this episode. But I do want to take some time on Ruth and start off there. Because Ruth is just some really cool storytelling that goes on right here. We have a section right after, when you're reading the Bible, you go through, you go through Genesis, you go through Exodus, you go through the journey of the Israelites through the wilderness, they go into the promised land, you go through the judges when they're in their new land and they're trying to figure out how to rule and falling into sin, they're not getting it right. We take a break from all that and we go into the story of Ruth. And Ruth is a very, it's very much like a break in the story. She marries a woman named Naomi. I'm sorry. She marries. I'm sorry. No. She marries a man who is the son of a woman named Naomi. And there's and Ruth is not an Israelite. Let me make that really clear.
Okay.
I believe she's a Moabite. But yeah, she's a Moabite. But she marries a child of a woman named Naomi. Naomi has two children, and Naomi loses everything. She loses her son. She loses her husband. She leaves Israel. She goes to a far away land, and she loses everything. And rather than just staying in that land with her now widowed daughters-in-law. Right, daughters-in-law, is that correct?
Yeah, daughters-in-law.
Rather than staying in that land, she chooses to go back to Israel. Like, there's no reason for her to stay there now, and she changes her name to Mara, which means like bitterness, I believe. But yeah, and anyway, crazy story. She goes back to Israel, and she knows that going back into a foreign country for these women would be very, very difficult as foreigners and widows. It would be very difficult. There would be no reason for them to share in that suffering with Naomi. So she tells them, you guys should stay here. Maybe you guys can find, a different husband here. Like, you guys have a much better chance here. You're still young and everything. So one of them accepts, but not Ruth. Ruth says, your people will be my people. Your God will be my God.
Wow.
She's known, for this moment of absolute faithfulness. And she goes with Naomi. Long story short, it's a very beautifully crafted story. But like I said, we have a lot to cover. So I'm going to kind of summarize things really quickly.
For sure.
She meets this guy named Boaz, who basically becomes what is known in that culture as the kinsman redeemer, or family redeemer, basically.
Yes.
And they would have this custom where if you if someone becomes a widow, the person closest to them, closest to that, to the brother that died, would marry the widow, so that that brother who has passed can have offspring through that woman. And also it's really done as a thing to keep that woman in the family, you know, so that she doesn't fall away. It's done in a way to honor, you know, the brother. But it's life for a widow was hard in Israel. It was difficult, and God created in Exodus, you see it, a lot of justice laws, social justice laws for widows and for foreigners. Because they weren't treated right. And we're going to see it again happening. You know, the prophets remind us of the importance of the social justice that God not just advocated, he made it a law, you know. So anyway, it was tough for them. So they would have this custom where they would have a kinsman redeemer. And this concept is huge. It's a beautiful picture of the future coming Christ, you know. And we're going to get to that in just a second. But Ruth's story is important. It feels like just this break, you know, from all that's going on. But really we get introduced to this concept of the kinsman redeemer on a very personal note for Ruth, which is just returning joy to Naomi. And she's no longer Mara, but she returns to being Naomi, and he provides really a life for Ruth. And Ruth and Boaz, David becomes a direct descendant of them. And so if you remember in the previous episode, we stopped at Saul. And now we're going to continue on with David, who was a descendant of Ruth. Which is pretty cool.
That is cool.
Because David, all right, now we kind of probably going to spend a minute on David, because now David was not like Saul at all. You know, we had this one king who was borderline mad, crazy guy, very, like, it's almost like he had an inability to see his own fault and wrongdoing. And David is like the opposite. I mean, David is quick to see his mistakes. And David is quick to aspire towards godliness and towards the heart of God, which is why he's known in the Bible as the man that was after God's own heart. You know, such a different king, and there's so much to take away from that. You know, there's so much to get from the life of David. One of the stories that I like a lot in the life of David, that really, like, it shows me the kind of humility I aspire to have. And humility is a big word with David. But there's this moment where David is with his men. You know, this is after. Okay, I didn't like establish a lot of what happens in the story of David, because I'm kind of assuming, you know, that a lot of people know. But he was a shepherd boy. He was kind of, you know, he was the youngest of all of his brothers. He gets anointed as king, and then he starts serving the king. Not as, you know, like, he gets anointed by king privately by Samuel. Just Samuel and the family. No one else sees and knows. And then he's serving King Saul as, you know, a very young kid. And he starts getting chased around by King Saul, and slowly he starts continuously working, but also getting chased, and then rising as like a commander in Israel, growing a following, and all these things. There comes a man who starts insulting David when he's going on the way with his men of war. These are people that, like, this is a culture where you look at the king wrong and you're dead. And this guy on the roadside just sits there and insults David. He's throwing insults at David. And it's like, all right, okay. The men of war just look at this guy and like, all right, we're gonna kill him. We're gonna take care of this guy. And David's like, no, don't kill him. You don't know if he is being sent on behalf of God to insult me, basically. And it's just like, oh my, the humility that David had, and the great reverence that he had for God. It's something so inspiring, you know, that we can all aspire towards having in our own lives, where we do nothing wrong against, whether it be Saul, who has been trying to kill us for so long, our entire lives, trying to literally steal us from the promise God had given us. We do nothing wrong to him. We don't even do nothing wrong to the stranger who's insulting us out of the blue in our place of strength. Like, we have it all. You know, like, we have the power, and this nobody starts insulting, and no, that could be the Lord. Like, wow,
that's wild.
Wow,
yeah,
crazy humility right there.
Yeah, a lot. It reminds me of the in another part of his life where Saul, because of his jealousy, he's trying to kill him. Like, at first it starts off as like a secret. He's like, there's like assassination attempts, you know, on David's life, and then it becomes like an open declaration of like, we're gonna try to kill you type thing. And so like he's on the run, and David's on the run, and he has an opportunity to kill Saul in a cave, and he right there, you know, he could he has the choice of ending his suffering, of ending his life on the run, and probably becoming king right then and there. Like, promoting himself to that post. And he says no, he's not going to do it. Because of what God said, which is touch not my anointed. And what a picture that is, because like there's just so much that can be said about it, but like to me it's like, what a man, like what a man he is. Honestly, to me, I see David as like the machoist guy in the Bible. Not even Samson's not even the machoist guy. He's like the machoist guy. He's the real picture of what a man is. Like the right balance of aggression with like I'm humble actually. You know, like it's like he's just it's inspiring to see like what a man he really is. To be able to bend himself low to receive God. Like his relationship with God had to have been that strong to say like, here I am physically, like everything is telling me, you know, I can kill this guy and end everything, like the time on the run, everything, his guys and everything, like he can just end it, but he says no, I'm gonna listen to what God said, and I'm not gonna do this thing here. And wow,
I have to read this section, dude.
Yes,
so
please.
in like exactly that story that you're talking about. And the men, this is 1 Samuel 24. And the men of David said to him, here is the day of which the Lord said to you, behold, I will give your enemy into your hand. Man, the men, this isn't even something. This isn't even like a situation. You know, they find Saul. He's sleeping in the cave. This isn't even a situation where they're like, all right, kill him and you're good now. No. They're reminding David of a promise that God had given to David. They're like, this is it. God fulfilled on his promise. You know, you kill people. Now is your chance. Like literally, he's asleep. He's delivered into your hands. He says, here is the day of which the Lord said to you, behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you. Wow. And it's like, this is a chance. This is literally fulfilling, like a fulfillment of the word of God. Man. Then David arose and stealthily cut a corner of Saul's robe, and afterward David's heart struck him because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe, and he said to his man, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed. Wow. So David goes in. He doesn't even kill him. You know, he just cuts off a corner and directly he's convicted. Here we have a clear, like a complete difference from Saul, who falls into sin. Like when Saul fell, and I believe he spared I think I can't remember if it was necessarily the livestock. It was either the livestock, the plunder, or the actual people. It was the people, I'm pretty sure. I think it was the kings even. Of the enemy that God had told him to go and pursue and destroy, and he spared them. And Saul came and Samuel, the prophet, came and convicted him of his sin. And he said, no, it's the people's fault. Like they wanted to spare these things. It wasn't me. And he's putting blame on other things when he is the leader and he directly opposed the will of God. And here we see the difference between him and David, who goes, you know, just after hearing literally his men bringing back the word of God that was spoken over his life, he cuts just a corner, and feels convicted of his sin. and he's like, you know what, I can't do this.
Yeah.
The Lord has forbidden me from touching the Lord's anointed. And what I've done already it's already convicted me.
Yeah.
And so afterward he arose, he went to the cave, and he calls out to Saul, and he says, "My Lord the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Behold, David seeks you harm'? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave. And son told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed." And as soon as, if you skip down to verse 16, as soon as David finishes this, Saul is like, "Is this your voice, my son David?" David, my son.
He tries to switch up on him.
My son. Oh, who I love so much,
Yes.
David.
God,
is that your voice? And it's like, dude, don't even, man. And Saul lifted up his voice and he wept, and he said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid good, whereas I have repaid you evil." And it's a crazy moment, you know. I just love that you kind of bring up that passage. It's a very powerful moment where we kind of see the difference between this king of David, who will kind of represent and establish what a good king of Israel would have looked like at the time, and someone like Saul, you know, who was everything that God warned Israel of when they said, "Give us a king." And he's like, king, they're gonna do this and that and that and that to you. And Saul was that picture. The next thing that David really brings to the story, to the full story, is the promise of the Messiah King. And you see that in 2 Samuel chapter 7. I'm not gonna read the whole thing right now, but in 2 Samuel chapter 7, if you go there, you're gonna see where the first time that we are promised this idea of the Messiah King being given to David. Now, while it's the first time we are promised it in this way, it's not, especially in the full context of the story, when you understand who this promised character is. It's not the first time he's foretold. He's actually foretold the first time in Genesis. When Adam and Eve fall into sin, and God is kind of like explaining them the consequences of their sin, and he tells Eve that she's gonna have pain in childbirth, and that there will be basically one of her descendants, her child will bruise the head, will crush the head of the serpent, and the serpent will bruise his heel.
So real quick, we see like the story of how it evolves, how masterful of a storyteller God is, and where we get things from. I just love how like we see that foreshadowing. We see the there will be a prophecy, or like not there will be a prophecy, but the prophecy is like, there will be someone who comes into your line that will crush the head of the serpent. The same serpent that deceived you, and so we see that, and we're seeing even now through David, as time goes on, like little reminders of that same prophecy. So we see like kind of like how the story is being woven and stuff. It's just like really nice to see.
It's crazy. And it's crazy because like there are these different things that people might not have associated together yet. But as the story gets more, as it develops and as it gets more clear, it's like, oh wait, all of these things are talking about a specific person, which is crazy. But anyway, in 2 Samuel 7, the Lord has a covenant with David, and he basically promises him a dynasty, and specifically a Messiah king, and the rest of the story takes a complete shift, because now we go through the journey of Israel, which is riddled with pain and disobedience and consequences of that, as well as the longing for this golden era where the Messiah King would reign forever. From the line of David, there would be a Messiah King that will reign forever and restore Jerusalem to the proper glory. Anyway, these become a lot more clear and specific as we go on through the story. But in the story of David specifically, he has this just wonderful rise. David's life is by any means easy. It's not easy by any means, At all, yeah. It there's a lot of grinding and working really, really hard, running a lot from Saul and from his enemy. And when Saul dies, he spends a while mourning. He spends a while mourning the death of Saul because it was the Lord's anointed. Yeah. I mean, even with that, he rises as a king and establishes and expands the land of Israel, and then falls into sin. Even David falls into sin. Yeah. And it's crazy. The passage tells us when it was time for the kings to be out at war, David wasn't where he was supposed to be out at war as the time was. He was back at home, and he slipped up. The devil used that opportunity. Yeah. But he also, made the choice and fell into sin. And there's a difference between when David falls and Saul falls. Once again, David quickly acknowledges his sin and repents when he's confronted by Nathan. It's a moment that completely shifts the story. Because we have this guy who was doing pretty good. He was doing pretty good. And he slipped up, and he got the forgiveness of God. Of course. But it had consequences. He got driven out again. David's life and kind of his story looks kind of it mirrors itself. Where in the beginning he's driven out by the previous king when he was supposed to be the rightful king, and he gets driven out, and once again he is established as a king while he is in exile, quote unquote, boom boom. He is out running when he is given the army that he's needed, and given the following, and given the entire nation of Israel while he's running from Saul. Before he becomes king, he's given that in exile. And even though all that's happening in the beginning, he's running. In the end, once again, his son kicks him out of the throne, and he's running again from his own son. And then his son dies, and then he's grieving his son just like he grieved Saul. And we have a broken king at the end of the life of David. But he kind of sets up the way that the rest of the story goes for the rest of these kings. Because we see some that do good, some that get it, and most of them, the whole lot of them, all the rest of them, they just really don't get it.
And there's a good point right there of the ones that get it and the ones that don't, because there's so much in that differentiates them in the ones that get it and the ones that don't, and we as believers should be people that get it. You know what I'm saying? We need to make sure we're people that get it. So we don't fall into their same failures and mistakes and things.
We have just after David, I believe it's two. I think it's 2 kings that after, maybe 3, because next we have Solomon, and also this is a time when a lot of the poetry books of the Bible, which in this, as we're covering the full story, we're not going to go into a lot of detail, not because they don't contribute to the story. They actually really, really do, and they contribute very powerfully to the story. But for the sake of going over the story very quickly, we're not going to spend a lot of time on Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and the poetry books of the Bible. But this is when a lot of them are being written and everything, and developed. It's during, David is one of the chief authors of Solomon of Proverbs. But we have Solomon. We have a couple kings after that basically are not being faithful. And the kingdom splits through the descent, in the line of David. The kingdom is under David until it splits, and then we have the northern kingdom, which is called Israel, and I believe Samaria is the capital there, and then we have Judea, which is Jerusalem down there in southern Israel. And that split, like in northern Israel, oh man, no, like we go through the book of Kings, none of, like, it goes through each of these kings, and kind of evaluates them, and none of them are found to be righteous kings.
Wow.
In southern Israel, just a few of them are found to be righteous kings.
Wow.
And most of them are also falling into sin.
Yeah.
And because of that, it brings forth this incredibly dark chapter that I'll talk about in just a second.
Wow.
But I want to also mention the presence of the prophets, because a lot of times when you look at the story of the Bible, or I don't know, looking at it chronologically, you can forget just how much the prophets were contemporaries of the kings. Like the prophets and what they're talking about, what they're dealing with, is kind of what you're going to read, what you're going to see as you read through Kings and Chronicles.
Yeah.
And so they're speaking to, like, the kings, especially the later kings of Israel, warning them of the actions of their disobedience and of the the consequence of that, and also of promising the hope of what is to come for Israel because of God's loving kindness, because of his redemption, because of his redemptive nature. Not necessarily because they got it right yet. They didn't. They didn't get it right yet. Actually, what they have done is bringing forth some really scary stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But God is a God of redemption. And the prophets just kind of show us what what the Lord does to evil. Like, he warns us about they warn us about the consequences of evil. Yeah. But they also show us the promise of what happens when we just absolutely trust in the Lord and get to see, his deliverance, and everything. And more importantly, they show us the loving and the loving nature of God, the redemptive nature of God, and how he always seeks to redeem his people to himself. And that's like I will say that in every episode if I can. Yeah, definitely. If I can remember that the core of this story is God redeeming the people to himself. So that's what the prophets are kind of showing us in this time. And then jumping back, we have a very, very, very dark day for Israel.
What is it?
And that's when Israel is defeated.
Wow.
Like, actually defeated. Not like temporarily, not like loses a battle. No, like they're driven out.
Dang.
Assyria conquers northern Israel, but they don't conquer southern Israel due to I believe it was Hezekiah, who was king at the time, who was righteous. He was a righteous king. He was one of the few. But later on, Hezekiah, right after choosing to put his faith in God when the Assyrians came knocking and seeing God deliver, right after putting his faith in God, he also chooses to put his faith in Babylon and tries to make an alliance with Babylon, which Isaiah warns him about. Isaiah the prophet is like, don't do this, they will be your downfall. And just as he predicted, I think it's like 100 years later or something, Babylon takes over Israel. In Babylon, if you look at the journey of Babylon, they were there since the beginning. Like, you look at the Tower of Babel, and this is kind of the birth of Babylon. Babylon has been there since Genesis, since day one.
That's wild.
Babylon has always been seeking to ascend to the place of godhood. And they are just like the staple, like the picture, the example of dynasty of power and of mankind trying to just be like, one, absolutely carnal, absolutely, fulfilling all of their needs, but also trying to like flaunt their power as gods. They literally, like the passage of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that we all remember from the Bible. That's people that were exiles in Babylon that were forced to worship the Babylonian god. Like, it was forced. They saw their power as a deity, and it was their ruin. Like, when you look at the prophets, they also prophesied about the downfall of Jerusalem. They also prophesied about the downfall of Babylon. And it was because of their seeing their force and worshiping their force as though it were a deity. Sticking it up to God. Basically.
Definitely. Just to interject real quick too about that. That's that's also a theme that we see all throughout the prophets and the kings is the idolatry. When Israel takes their eyes away from God and puts it somewhere else and like worshiping the other thing, they're always falling. Always. We see it again and again and again. And then when God appointed new kings, the first thing, the good ones at least, the first thing they would do is like tear down the idol worship, and then things would be going back to normal. But that's like a thing that we all need to understand is the idolatry will cause our downfall, and if we're and what's interesting even about this specific case is that King Hezekiah was warned not to do it, not to form the alliance by Isaiah, and he did it anyways, and they had a good result for 100 years. You said, right?
I think about that.
About that. So they were okay for a time, but in the long run they fell. So we see that like apart from God, apart from obedience from God, even if what you're looking for, the thing that you're looking to do is will bring you the result that you're looking for, it will only be a temporary thing. The result won't be long lasting, won't have the right foundation if it's not based in God. If it's not based in God, you'll eventually, at the end of the day, it will end in that.
That's right. So we see this very dark day for Israel, and the prophets talk about it a lot. And there are a couple of things that happen that are very interesting here. One is a lot of prophecies are given through the prophets that bring us to hope in a future Israel that's restored. Actually, even when the prophets are prophesying the downfall of Israel before it falls, they prophesy about its return out of exile.
Wow.
And into this new Jerusalem that's reigned by the Messiah promised king. Isaiah talks in great detail about it. The book of Isaiah talks about so much, like it goes so far. He lays out not only the fact that there will be a Messiah king, but he lays out how this Messiah king will go about restoring people to God.
Wow.
Like he literally explains how this king, this anointed one, is going to essentially die and be an atonement for the sin of Israel.
Wow.
And then, he kind of like jumps forward. He doesn't like necessarily say anything like about a resurrection, but all of a sudden like the king dies, right? The anointed one dies for Israel as an atonement, and then all of a sudden he's alive again. If you continue reading the prophecy, he's alive again. And it's like, what? So he like explains the whole process through which the anointed one will go about this. And it's absolutely, it's really cool. And it's pretty crazy. But also we have a lot of other prophets prophesying, and Isaiah himself as well, prophesying about the new Jerusalem that's going to be established forever. The new temple that will be built, that everyone will be able to come and to praise and worship God, and all of Israel be united. So now eventually we have a time when people are brought out of exile. The people are released from exile to go and to worship God in their temple, and it's not quite like the way the prophets promised. It's like there is no Messiah king that's kind of reigning. The temple isn't even restored to the former glory that it had, let alone this great new Jerusalem that it's just not what was promised. And you know what happens like when the new temple's built?
What happens?
The elders who had remembered what the previous temple were like were grieved. Like people, like they just finished building this crazy cool temple with with a lot of work. The young people are pretty happy about it, but the elders are grieved about it because they're like, this is not even even the former glory, let alone what the prophets were prophesying. It's like, what's happening? Yeah. And the prophets continue, like when I'm talking about the prophets, there's what? I think 14. I think there's about 14 of them. There, we have major prophets, minor prophets. There's a lot, and there are some of them that were prophesying at this time. There were some that were prophesying before the exile, during the exile, after the exile. There's prophets all along. Anyways, prophets that were contemporary of this time were prophesying how the New Jerusalem, the Messiah King, that era that was promised, this isn't it. This isn't it. In fact, we're still in exile. Yeah. Wow. Still in exile. Yeah. And sometimes it's crazy because sometimes we can think, because, like one thing has happened in our life or something that we have like gotten out of our season of wilderness. Yeah. We got out of our season of exile. Yeah. Or something like that. And it feels like, wait, things aren't quite the same. We have to keep in mind the reality of what exile in the Bible really becomes. Good. We see Daniel show us how to live in exile, and we see a lot of people like the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're serving Babylon. They're living in Babylon. They're planting. This is actually what they're told to do. The prophets tell them that they should be planting and building houses and having their families and praying for the well-being of Babylon, a wicked kingdom. But to be in this kingdom, but not of it. This very familiar that we are supposed to be in this world, but not of this world. We're still in exile. And we need to keep that in mind when it comes to how we engage with God, with the nations at play around us. And the promised new Israel that is still yet to come. And we're going to see that as we continue through the story. But that promised Israel is still yet to come. It has still not happened to this day. Still in exile. And we have them come out of exile, and it feels like the exile season has ended. But as we see truly from the beginning, exile has kind of been a human condition. Wow. And they come out, they seek to start anew and everything, but they get conquered as they fall into sin. They get conquered by a new nation. They get conquered by a new nation. Get conquered again. Get conquered. Until finally, Rome is the established kingdom residing over Israel. Wow. And the stage is set for we have a new oppressed Israel who is oppressed under Rome. But the stage is set for the Messiah King. Yes. And that's what this next episode we're going to talk about is going to be about. Yo, I'm telling you right now, that episode is going to be very it's going to be fire. That is the climax of the whole story, the climax. You do not want to miss that episode. I do not want to miss that episode. I'm excited right now. No, me too. So it's an absolutely amazing part of this story. I hope that this is helping make sense as we're going through the story of the Bible, just how it is one complete story. We're not able to go into a lot of details, but what we do hope is that this story becomes unified in our minds as one story. Yeah, one story. There's a lot of very specific parts with a lot of depth we can't get into just in these first couple of episodes. But we can do this: show and display the oneness of the story of the Bible. Yeah. And so Yes. All right. Yes. Thank you for tuning in, guys. All right. We'll see you on the next one.